Welcome to the Pacific Research Institute Next Round podcast. I'm Tim Anaya, PRI's Vice President of Marketing and Communications, and with me, as always, is our friend and PRI's Communication Director, Matt Fleming. Matt, how are you today?
Good, Tim. How are you?
I am good, and I bet, like me, you are glad you did not make the trek to Washington, D.C. this past weekend for Nerd Prom, as they call it, or the White House Correspondents Dinner, because, well, we might have been running for our lives during the evening with the tragic assassination attempt of President Trump and Trump administration officials, allegedly at the hand of a fella from California. So obviously the White House Correspondents Dinner tops our podcast this week, and in watching it, and I looked at it through the lens of how did people respond to it? How were people communicating about it? And I think it really was a very sad statement about our politics today, about where we are at, both in politics and with media coverage of it, because when you see anyone, doesn't have to be a president, narrowly escape, not the first, not the second, but the third attempted assassination, the human response to that is, oh my gosh, how horrible. We pray for everybody's safety. We hope everybody is safe, not injured, that they get home safely, and that whoever perpetrated this crime is brought to justice. But yet we see the worst in our politics and the worst in our media when you have events like this, because everybody takes the opportunity to kind of one-up themselves over their political opponents. And instead of saying, what a horrific event, we hope that everyone is safe and everyone is okay, the response from too many people is, we hope everyone is okay, we condemn this, but... And the but usually is followed by, but that person's nasty talk started it. That person's political agenda encouraged this person. That person's actions here or there are the reason why we have people like this. And, it's a crazy person. And crazy people are irrational. And also, if you really are as much of an opponent of what that person did, well, I think you got to be better in how you approach it. And that starts with, we condemn this act. We hope everyone is safe. We pray for everyone's safety and good health, period. And it was disappointing to me to see, there were even people on Twitter comparing how many assassination attempts were there on Barack Obama's life during his presidency compared to President Trump's, as if we're trying to one-up one another now. We saw the House Democratic leader kind of, I don't actually know what he was trying to say, but my takeaway from it was that, well, I'm not going to have words of sympathy or healing because Donald Trump pardoned January 6th insurrectionists, which is a terrible thing that he did. Again, if we want things to be better and change, you need to start by being better yourself. Matt, what say you on all of this, what we observed, and this kind of mess that we find ourselves in today?
Well, Tim, I don't know that I have too much to add to that. I mean, I think you nailed it. It's obviously a tragic state of affairs. I was going to say it's a tragedy, but he didn't get assassinated, so it wasn't a tragedy in that sense. But obviously, events themselves are becoming less and less safe, which that is a tragedy. And I mean, you're right. Trump is certainly not innocent when it comes to contributing to the divisiveness of the moment. Having said that, he is one of many people making our politics toxic, and shooters are crazy by definition. And the more that anybody starts calling anyone a Nazi or a fascist or all of the stuff people people say about Democratic members of Congress and all that stuff. It's all bad, and it just anybody who already has a weird fixation on this stuff and is already sort of imbalanced, it just helps them go over the edge. And I'm with you where it's just so strange to see people like keeping score of how many of the ideology of each individual shooter. And even if there is one ideology that is more prominent, it's still something that we should widely condemn. And I'm with you where, look, if you don't have anything nice to say, just don't say anything. Like everybody feels like they have this need to say something stupid and caustic on Twitter. And it's like, you don't need to say that. Your base isn't going to be like, oh, where was your caustic tweet about Trump? They just probably won't even wonder. So just say, I'm glad everyone is safe and let's stop shooting each other, or just don't say anything. I don't know why that's so hard.
And it started even with the construct of this dinner, right? There was a really organized, I don't know, protest, for lack of a better term, of several current and former prominent journalists, signing a letter expressing their outrage that journalists would even sit down at a dinner with the President of the United States, which is something that's happened every year for decades. And oh, by the way, happens in Congress every day, happens in state capitals every day, etc. Part of your job as a journalist is to have relationships with elected officials, policymakers, and staff. It's the kind of cheering on of the Luigi Mangione, the fellow who allegedly murdered the United Healthcare CEO because, well, we disagree with his policies running a healthcare giant, so it's okay to assassinate him. It's the kind of new movement of where, well, it's okay to steal this or that because this policy or that policy is unjust in someone's mind, so it excuses bad behavior. Bad behavior is bad behavior, and the only behavior you can control is your own. And so, both Michelle Obama and Melania Trump have had some version of a be better campaign during their first ladyships. And I think that that's probably, to me, that's the main takeaway for me from kind of this incident and kind of in general, the scourge of whataboutism. Yes, you might not be wrong that that person did something bad, but you can control you, and the way to lower the temperature, to lower the toxicity is for you to be better. That's what you can control.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we're all adults and need to take responsibility for our own actions. And we always come at this from a California perspective. And let's say that Trump is as bad as California Democrats make him out to be. Okay, I don't think he is, but let's say that he is. To mimic him and be like, well, this is what the moment calls for us to just act like him, but just worse. It's just a foolish argument, and I have no doubt that all of the Republicans who condemn that when Democrats are in office, they'll be doing the exact same thing. I mean, at some point, somebody has to try to step up and be a better person. It doesn't feel like that's going to be Trump. It doesn't seem to be in his nature. But it would be nice if he was an aberration and not, the first of many.
That's right. That's right. And I will say too, for all the criticism of kind of his agenda and the California way, Governor Newsom had it exactly right with his response. He said he's relieved everyone is safe. A free press is foundational to our country. Violence is never acceptable. You don't have to say much more than that.
That's a totally appropriate and fine response. No one is going to say, "Oh, I hate Gavin Newsom because he didn't say I wish Trump had died." I mean, it's just, and even if someone did say that, why would that be the person Newsom is trying to court? Just be gracious, be grateful not everyone, no one got hurt, and leave it at that, or just don't tweet anything.
Maybe that's the way. Go. Just don't tweet anything. And the attention now in the days afterward turns to kind of the policy questions, right? There's a lot of issues about the Secret Service. Seems like there are real problems there. Is it with the training? Is it with their methodology? Is it with how they approach the job? We're going to have a lot of questions about that. The issues of having safe venues to have events like these, because the president's instinct was right. You want to go and get right back up and have this event, and don't give the would-be assassin, the would-be terrorist, the satisfaction that you disrupted free expression, free activity, freedom of expression. Then, of course, there's the debate over the infamous ballroom that's being built at the White House, and some members of Congress have introduced legislation to have taxpayers pick up the tab now for this event. There are legal questions now of can the president, just with essentially executive powers, have this ballroom built? It seems a little more complicated from that. I don't know that the shooting is an excuse to have taxpayers pick up the tab for the ballroom, but I think certainly it would be appropriate for Congress to pass whatever legislation to authorize the project and get this thing built without delay, using private funds, of course.
I don't know the logistics of it. I mean, you raised a lot of really good questions, but certainly it does create a sort of the situation calls for a bit of an endorsement of the project. I mean, that's kind of what Trump is saying. I mean, sure, we can say that he just wants to put his name on something. That's what detractors would say, but his argument is that there needs to be a place to hold these kinds of events, and I don't know. Seems like he's making a good point.
Well, at the end of the night, there was great sentiment expressed for having the dinner again and having it pretty quickly, within the next 30 days. Who knows if that will be logistically possible to get, whether it's the Washington Hilton or an alternate event set and squared away and secured. But one thing is for sure, whenever the event is reheld, Matt and I will be sitting at home. We won't have tickets. Our invitation will be lost in the mail once again.
I almost got tickets one time when I worked at Roll Call. I at least had a possibility of it. I can't say that I would have ended up getting them, but I at least had a possibility. And I was looking forward to going, but in the Trump era, it's just gotten so the comedians became less funny. It just became them airing their liberal grievances against Trump. And then I think for a while they wanted to scrap the comedian and just make it a historian, which just sounds so boring. And honestly, I've stopped paying attention to the event as a standalone event. Obviously, I paid attention this year for the reasons we just talked about. But yeah, I mean, it just sounds like a drag now.
We'll get back to next round in just a moment, but first, are you getting PRI's regular email updates? If not, go to pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get the facts you need to fight back delivered every week to your inbox. Every week, PRI sends you what you need to know about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and Sacramento, and gives you the free market ideas needed to save our state and our nation. By going to pacificresearch.org and clicking the sign up button, you can sign up to have Policy Alert, our weekly roundup of all the best ideas from PRI scholars delivered to your inbox. Or you can sign up for event updates so you're the first to know when PRI is coming to your community with great events. So sign up now at pacificresearch.org and click the sign up button at the top of the page to get PRI's content delivered to your inbox each week. Let's turn our attention to California and the governor's race. And, last week we gave great attention to the first gubernatorial debate, which was on the next star stations across California. This week we had the next debate, which was held on the campus of Pomona College, and it aired on the CBS stations across California. And we're not going to go in great detail, as great a detail, I should say, as we did last week, but there were some very interesting things that happened in this debate that we want to talk about. So, for starters, and don't worry, we'll get into the moderators in a bit, it was the first time on the stage that we saw Superintendent of Public Instruction Tony Thurmond and former Mayor and Speaker Antonio Villaraigosa on the stage. So we didn't have a chance to talk about them last week, so we thought we'd spend a few minutes talking about how they fared on the debate stage. Let's start with Thurmond first. Matt loves to write about and challenge and, dare we say, make fun of Mr. Thurmond and many of his qualities or lack thereof as a public official and his candidacy. I think if you were we talked a lot last week about, my take is that if you were kind of a regular Republican voter and you were watching the debate at home and you saw Sheriff Bianco, well, yes, for the powers that be, the political insiders, you were tisk-tisking a lot of the things that he said. But when you look at kind of how he talked and how he presented himself, well, I think it's how kind of most regular Republicans talk and think. And it remains to be seen, but I think that he could pick up a lot of Republican support, from regular Republican voters hearing his presentation. And I wonder if we might have the same thing for Tony Thurmond. Now, he's mired at, typically at 1% in the polls. On a good day, he's at 2%. But if you listen to kind of how he presented his story, how he was talking about kind of his issues and the way he would do things, the way he kind of mixed it up with Sheriff Bianco and others on the stage. Boy, I think if you're kind of a mainline Democrat voter, why wouldn't you give this guy a look? Because it seemed to me that there would be a lot to find appealing if you're a regular Democrat on paper, hearing what Tony Thurmond had to say on the stage. Matt, what say you? I think you're probably going to have a different take on his performance than I did.
I think his performance was fine, I guess. I just don't know. He's a dud. Was a dud as an assembly member. He has certainly been a total dud as superintendent of public instruction. He's been running for governor for nearly 3 years and is polling at 0 to 1%. I guess he was fine up on the stage. I think people have seen him and they don't care, They might not remember his name, right? He might not be a household name, but he certainly had plenty of opportunity getting in front of California voters, and he's not memorable. He's not interesting. What's funny is last night he honestly had the nerve and the gall to talk about what was wrong with California's K through 12 public education system, as if he hasn't been running the Department of Education for the past almost 8 years. I don't know. I mean, I guess you're right. Sure, he was there and he didn't embarrass himself, but I just can't think of a bigger dud than him. And that's saying a lot because I can think of a lot of duds, but there's no one less deserving of a promotion.
He has nowhere to go but up, I would say. So, from that aspect of it, and with the debates that we have left, I don't know if he's going to be included in the CNN debate or any of the future debates. So it may be, one of the few opportunities that voters statewide have to see him. I thought what was interesting, and I know you have a lot to say on this point, when he talked about affordability of college education, he made the point that he works a night job now to afford the cost of education for his kids. Now, the way he presented it, yeah, I think that's a way where a lot of people, a lot of working class people, a lot of very middle class people identify with. They're willing to make those sacrifices for their kids to give their kids the opportunity for a great education. But Matt, the devil, of course, is always in the details, and certainly when you probe the reality of this second job, well, it's quite different than how he presents it with his rhetoric.
Yeah, I mean, so he's leaning heavily on his personal story. And forgive me if I get some of these details slightly wrong, but his mother died when he was 6, and his father, I think, left the family when he was a teenager. Regardless, he's spent most of his life without parents, and both for really sad, tragic reasons. He did have a tough upbringing. And the second job story is sort of relatable, except for I believe the SPI makes $160,000 a year, which, in California is slightly above like a comfortable wage. 160,000 is nothing to sneeze at, but it's also in California, you have to always put it into perspective, but it's not a bad wage. But yeah, he thinks that saying that he's working the second job, like he's, at a truck stop, waiting tables or something, makes it sound endearing, but he's done such a bad job at his day job, the one he was hired for. And he's saying, like, look at how I'm doing, now I'm working 2 jobs. It's like, to me, the question is if he were elected governor, he'd still be working 2 jobs. So that means is he gonna suck at governor as well? I mean, I just think about it like this, like, Tim, you're my supervisor. If I were to get a second job, and it didn't conflict with this job, I think the one concern you would express would be it's fine as long as it doesn't impede with us, which is your number one priority in terms of work. And I think that's the same thing is true with SPI. And I don't know if his second job gets in the way of his job at SPI, but it can't be helping. And the truth is, the biggest narrative that he's had as superintendent is that he's no show, is that he doesn't do a particularly good job. He's not really around. During COVID, he was a ghost. He's been so bad, in fact, that Gavin Newsom just randomly said, by the way, I think we should just get rid of the position. He has just been such a dud. And so when I heard the thing about the second job, that's kind of what I thought is like the second job is probably getting in the way of you doing your first job. And I can only think that if you were to become governor, the same thing would happen. Although I do believe governor pays better than SPI.
And let alone, during the pandemic when we needed the superintendent of schools the most, when our schools were shuttered for far too long in California, during those famous Newsom at noon press conferences every day, whenever something about education was discussed, he was never seen. I don't think he was seen one time, maybe, once or twice. Whenever there was something on education discussed, it was always Linda Darling Hammond, the chair of the State Board of Education.
Yeah, he was a no-show. It was a real thing. I think he showed up to one or two events just kind of as a prop, but yeah, I mean he wasn't really part of that is because Newsom wanted the spotlight too, so we got to give Thurmond a little bit of grace for that, but just a total no-show. I mean, just think about it like this. Like Tim, you and I are pretty active consumers of news. This guy's been running for governor for nearly 3 years. Can you think of anything he's really done as SPI to get any sort of earned media? Does he do anything to kind of get in our in our get our attention in any way? I mean,
Maybe in a not so good way. Certainly not an accomplishment.
not an accomplishment. Yeah, I can't think of any sort of initiative a competent politician would have found a way.
That's right. That's right. Well, the other person who had his kind of big moment in the sun on the debate stage last night was Antonio Villaraigosa. And I got to say, watching him, I thought it was kind of sad. This is a guy who's been a major force in California politics for most of my adult life, right? That he was Speaker of the Assembly, mayor of Los Angeles, a gubernatorial candidate 8 years ago, a big, big name, and yet he looked kind of shockingly old off to the side. I was surprised they didn't, give his hair a little spritz of color. And he just seemed like kind of yesterday's news. And he, not to say that he didn't make some very good and interesting points. I mean, I think he is living in reality, and he largely has a pretty realistic platform. He certainly, has the experience to know kind of what he wants to do and how he wants to do it. And I think he has a lot of realistic ideas. But boy, I just thought he just looked like kind of a sad guy on the sidelines of a debate, a race, a movement that's moved far past him. What say you?
Yeah, I mean, he just looked so old. He just looked so old. Grading on a curve, he wouldn't necessarily be the person I would vote for, just of my own personal beliefs. But of the Democrats on the stage, he had a lot of things that make sense. Yeah, he just looks old. He just looks old, and he has some okay answers, but I was bored watching him. I mean, if we're just talking about like debate performance, Thurmond was a much more
Lively,
yeah,
perhaps?
energetic, had a persona. Villaraigosa was like the grandfather, just like trying to like, kick knowledge to the younger generation or something like that. Like it just wasn't, and, it wasn't like he was wrong, right? But it was just kind of annoying. And I don't know. He was someone, the racist passed him by, and I don't want to be too mean to him because again, he didn't have bad ideas. A lot of his ideas weren't bad, I should say. Some of them were, but yeah, it's like you wish he had like a friend or something who would just be like, dude, time's up. I mean, I'm sure he's had friends tell him that, how politicians are, but it's just sad. It's just sad to watch.
That's right. That's right. Now, one thing that we like to talk about when we are kind of looking at debates, and we talked about it a little bit last week, is how did the format of the debate affect the discussion? How did the moderators affect the discussion? And, I think the moderators were largely pretty good in the first debate for this debate, you and I were texting this morning, and I said, I think that was the worst debate I've ever seen in my life, what we saw. It was, they had, strangely, what was it, out of five different moderators, and they thought they were contestants on the stage. They put words in the mouths of the different candidates. They had these kind of bizarre, you could speak for 30 seconds. You could, one time, I think it was Pat Harvey said, you have 5 seconds to give an answer. Okay, well, what do you say after that? The ding, ding, ding of the bell. Pat Harvey asked them in one of these kind of lightning round questions, do you support suspending the gas tax to deal with the high gas prices? But then she said, but stay tuned because in a half an hour, we're going to ask in-depth questions about gas prices. Well, why wouldn't you just talk about gas prices all at once? It was as if she wanted to get her moment in the sun talking about gas prices. Julie Watts from CBS here in Sacramento, who there were some admirable qualities about kind of her approach to it. Certainly, she did the infamous interview with Katie Porter that rocked her campaign. But I was reminded of, you watched the movie Election with Reese Witherspoon, the young lady running for class president who drove Matthew Broderick crazy. Kind of got that vibe watching her, and she wanted to keep telling you how smart she was, and no, that's not quite right, Mr. Smith, Mr. So-and-so. Not surprisingly, watching it, she was wrong on some of the points. The fact checker, self-appointed, was wrong in some of the points that she was making. So I just thought that both the format and the number of and the performance of the moderators, it was just too much. It detracted too much from the debate. We want to hear the candidates and what they have to say, and we want to hear them mix it up. We don't want to hear the moderator. The moderator should be there to kind of prevent chaos, keep people roughly on track, ensure equal time. I think of my friend, the late great Stan Statham, who was a moderator of many of the great gubernatorial debates over the years. He was president of the California Broadcasters Association, former state assemblyman. You wouldn't have seen this kind of mess on the stage. You saw entertaining, memorable debates. We still remember that famous recall debate that he moderated. We needed more of that, less of all of these different reporters from around the state looking for their moment in the sun. Matt, what say you?
I generally try not to criticize debate moderators and journalists in general, just because I feel like I have an appreciation for what they go through. We talked about it last time. The last moderators, Nikki Lorenzo, and I forget who the other one was, they did a great job. And I can't help but point out that part of the reason why they did a great job was because the candidates did a better job of playing by the rules. This time, I think candidates did a less good job of playing by the rules, but the moderators, just many of them were just so over the top, so much pretext to every question, so much of their own personal, whatever. They're like, oh, I was talking to a person today. And it's like, that's what the candidates say. I don't want to hear about how you were talking to a person today, moderator one. Why don't you just ask your question and move on? A little bit of context is great, but they were like these stem winder questions that, like, by the time you're done, you're like, where did we even start? And yeah, I mean, the here, you have 5 seconds to answer is just so strange. And Julie Watts, who's a great journalist, just at one point she said to Tony Thurmond, "Oh, I saw your new ad. What a great ad!" And it's like, why are you saying that? Why are you saying anything like that as a debate moderator? You shouldn't be saying anything like that. So it was widely panned across the ideological spectrum. The format was really bizarre, and the times when it got interesting, when candidates were kind of mixing it up a bit, they were quick to try to exert their dominance. And it's a really tough job, but they really fell flat.
Yeah, they really did. The putting words in their mouth, they'd say, well, Mr. Smith, I know you stand for blah, blah, blah. Well, let him say that. We don't need you to say it, right? But I think that the biggest lesson as a moderator, you need to get out of the way. It's not about you. Set it up, pave the way. You said about, well, they kind of violated the rules. Well, I think that we want to see candidates mix it up in debate policy. I don't think that's seconds. To me, that doesn't matter, right? That, oh, you spoke for 42 seconds, not 35. But have a good, kind of format where everybody gets their say. The late Larry King, who moderated many kind of informal debates on his program, his strategy was always the same. He didn't have formal time limits, didn't have all these rules, and he kept track of everything to make sure that everyone got roughly a fair shake in the evening. And I think that these moderators would be better served kind of adhering to that approach. And let's hope that our friends on CNN, who will be hosting the next debate next week, adhere to that philosophy. So, as we wrap up our discussion of the debate, Matt, do you have any other major takeaway from this week's debate? Did anybody do particularly well or bad, or really more anything memorable to help or hurt their cause?
Just one more thing about the moderators. I thought that the inclusion of Sarah Sadwani, who is she was on the Citizens Redistricting Commission, and is also a professor at Pomona College. Her inclusion was grossly inappropriate. She came out as a supporter of Prop 50, which undercut her own work on the Citizens Redistricting Commission. You might remember Prop 50 was the Gavin Newsom's gerrymandering effort that we just voted on. Including her pre-Prop 50 to me would have been totally fine. But after Prop 50, she literally came out in one of the most caustic gerrymandering efforts, which cast aside her own credibility and made her just into a complete partisan. Her inclusion, although her performance wasn't that bad, her inclusion on the stage was grossly inappropriate. So I just want to be very clear about that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that anything really changed. I thought that Katie Porter probably improved her standing a little bit. I don't know how much, but I think she again came off as pretty reasonable. I think that Becerra is probably the front runner. But is just a complete dud. There were some really great moments between a lot of candidates and him. Steve Hilton asking him if he understands how, statute on emergency powers, and people really challenging him. I thought Matt Mahan probably did a pretty good job, but I'm not sure that it mattered. Bianco, I think, probably improved his standing with Republicans, but probably no one else. Hilton, I thought, looked better than the first time. Not that I thought he looked bad the first time, but I thought he had more broader appeal this time. And Tom Steyer, I thought, looked old and cranky and very, very lame. I think he probably didn't do himself any favors. And then there's someone we're forgetting, I think. Maybe not. Maybe that's it, but I just don't know that it's going to
There
shake
were
things
eight
up.
people. We forgive you for not remembering everybody.
Yeah, I just I don't think it's going to shake things up too much. I think that candidates didn't really do much to knock Becerra off his perch, and it seems like he's still kind of where the smart money is. Although at the rate he's going, it looks like if he were to win, come in first or second in the primary, it would be like by a point or two. I mean, he's not doing anything to differentiate himself. I just think at the end of the day, Democratic voters will look at him and think this is our safe choice, even though safe choice isn't really safe, you know?
Yeah, I think I would generally agree with that. I think Matt Mahan, once again, to me, head and shoulders above anybody on the debate stage. Again, the issue with him, right, is to me, as the right temperament, the platform that's a realistic platform for the times we're in and the challenges we face. The issue is in the pan-leftist world in California, who is his constituency? And I think that continues to be a big question going forward. He certainly is picking up in the latest polls that came out this week, but he's still kind of stuck in fifth place. So, who is his constituency going forward? I agree. I thought Javier Becerra once again had a very poor debate, and I think that the questions about executive powers, we do a lot of work on that here at PRI, and he clearly was poised to take kind of a Trump view of executive powers, whatever I say it is as governor is. And Steyer looked kind of fumbly and wasn't really presenting what appeared to be very realistic answers to what he was being challenged on. So we will see how they all fare in next week's debate, as we are out of time today for our discussion. So thank you all for joining us for this week's episode of Next Round, and we'll be back again next week to talk about, I'm sure, the hot races and issues as our primary election season heats up up as we race toward the June primary. So thanks again for listening, and we hope you'll join us again next week for another episode of Next Round.
If you like this episode, please tell your friends and subscribe to PRI's podcast at iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. And when you're on these platforms, don't forget to give us a big 5 stars. If you don't subscribe to any of these, you can still listen on PRI's YouTube page, youtube.com/Pacific Research 1. That's the number 1. Thanks for listening. I'm Rowena Itchon. Hope you'll come back again for Next Round with PRI.